Yeah, he was going a bit strange by then. John Lennon doesn't have to do Top of the Pops, he would say. Syd, are you crazy? This is what we've been working for, man. Come on, let's go for it. I shouldn't laugh because it was very sad what happened, but he was just not making very much connection with anything that you and I would consider to be real. And but he never did buck up from sort of that moment on, really. He wrote a few more songs, but nothing of any real note. And he just got more and more and more detached until he was completely wacky and not making any sense. I made a lot of attempts to find out what was wrong and to involve his family. He had elder brothers who I would ring up and say, hey, there's something really wrong with Roger, as they called him, because his name was Roger Barrett, not Syd Barrett.
Oh.
Pink Floyd didn't break up with Syd Barrett in a meeting. There was no argument, no shouting, no dramatic goodbye. There was only a day when someone asked a simple question, and no one answered. That's the part most people don't realize. Syd Barrett didn't leave Pink Floyd. Pink Floyd moved on without him. At first, they told themselves it was temporary, that he was tired, distracted, playing games, that he'd snap back the way he always had. But slowly, something darker became impossible to ignore. Syd stopped reacting the way a person should, stopped responding to pressure, stopped connecting to the world everyone else was standing in. And while the band was rising television shows, interviews, expectations, the person who created Pink Floyd was drifting somewhere they couldn't reach. This story isn't about excess. It's not about fame gone wrong. It's about a moment when four young men realized that love, loyalty, and hope were no longer enough, and that keeping Syd might destroy everything they were trying to build. So one day, without an announcement, without a confrontation, Pink Floyd made a choice, and Syd Barrett disappeared from the band that was built around him. Before we continue, if you love Pink Floyd's stories and want to keep their legacy alive, subscribe, like, and share. Before the confusion, before the silence, there was Syd. He wasn't just the frontman. He wasn't just the songwriter. He was the atmosphere. In the early days, Pink Floyd revolved around his ideas whimsical, surreal, unpredictable, and completely original. Syd wrote most of the songs. He shaped the band's identity. Even the name Pink Floyd came from his imagination. To the outside world, he looked carefree and eccentric. Inside the band, he was essential. But even then, cracks were forming. As success approached, Syd's relationship with structure began to crumble. Rehearsals became unreliable. Focus came and went. Sometimes he'd be brilliant, other times unreachable. At first, the band laughed it off. Syd was just being Syd. But the pressure was changing everything. Television appearances, record deals, schedules that didn't bend. And Syd wasn't bending with them. He wasn't rebelling against the system. He was slipping away from it. Still, no one wanted to say the words out loud. Because how do you confront the person who is the band? And how do you move forward when the very thing that made you special is also the thing beginning to unravel? The first real warning signs didn't happen in private. They happened on television. As Pink Floyd began appearing on major UK TV shows, something strange started to occur. During rehearsals, Syd would mime along normally. Everything seemed fine. But when the cameras rolled, he'd freeze. He'd stop playing, stand still, or deliberately derail the performance. Producers were confused. The band was embarrassed. At first, it looked like mischief, Syd joking with the format, refusing to play along with pop conventions. He even joked that John Lennon didn't have to mime on shows like this. But beneath the humor was something unsettling. This wasn't rebellion. It was detachment. Syd wasn't reacting to pressure the way others did. He wasn't anxious or angry. He simply wasn't there. In dressing rooms, he'd grow distant. In conversations, disconnected. The band tried to encourage him, remind him this was what they'd worked for. But Syd didn't seem to recognize the goal anymore. And that's when a terrifying realization began to form. This wasn't a phase that would pass after the show. This wasn't exhaustion. Something fundamental was slipping, and no amount of success could pull it back. Before Pink Floyd ever considered letting Syd go, they tried to save him. Quietly. Desperately. They contacted his family. They spoke to his older brothers. They tried to explain that something wasn't right. Syd's behavior wasn't just erratic, it was alarming. He'd stop responding mid-conversation, say things that made no sense in context, drift away while standing right in front of them. The band tried to get him professional help more than once. They'd bring him to appointments, guide him to the door, and he wouldn't go in. No confrontation, no refusal, just a blank refusal to cross the threshold. And all the while, Pink Floyd was accelerating. Tours were booked. American shows were scheduled. The machine was moving, whether Syd was ready or not. The band was young, unprepared. They didn't have answers, only fear. Fear of losing their friend. Fear of losing the band. Fear that stopping everything might not help anyone. And that's the cruel truth. They weren't choosing between right and wrong. They were choosing between impossible options. And the road ahead would force them to decide whether Syd Barrett could survive inside Pink Floyd, or whether Pink Floyd could survive with Syd Barrett. It wasn't a studio that finally exposed the truth. It was the road. On tour in the United States, the distance between Syd and reality became impossible to ignore. He wasn't just distracted or unmotivated, he was disoriented. Locations didn't register. Conversations collapsed halfway through. Meaning slipped away mid-sentence. One moment in particular haunted the band. Walking down the street near Hollywood and Vine, Syd looked around, smiled, and casually said, "It's nicer in Las Vegas, isn't it?" They weren't in Las Vegas. At first, it sounded harmless, almost poetic. Then his expression changed. He stared at the ground and muttered a single word. People. That was it. No explanation, no context, just a fragment. In that instant, something shifted for the band. This wasn't eccentricity. This wasn't creative overload. This was someone losing their grip on where they were and who they were with. On stage, it got worse. Syd couldn't reliably play. Sometimes he wouldn't touch his guitar at all. Other times he'd strum randomly, detached from the song and the crowd. The band began to understand something terrifying. They weren't managing unpredictability anymore. They were watching someone vanish in real time. And the question they had avoided for months suddenly demanded an answer. How long could they keep pretending this was survivable? There are moments that don't feel dramatic until much later. One of those moments happened in a hotel room. Someone walked in and saw Syd sitting quietly, a cigarette burning between his fingers. It burned all the way down, paper, filter, heat. Syd didn't react. He didn't flinch, didn't notice, didn't move. The cigarette fell to the floor. That image stayed with them. Not because it was shocking, but because it was final. This wasn't a man being difficult. This wasn't rebellion. This was someone no longer registering pain. At that point, fear replaced frustration. The band started talking in lowered voices. Not about music. About safety. Could Syd travel like this? Could he stand under stage lights? Could he even protect himself? They explored desperate compromises. Let Syd write but not tour. Let someone else play live. Anything to avoid the unthinkable. That's when David Gilmour entered the picture, not as a replacement, but as a shield. Someone to cover when Syd couldn't. But even that solution failed. Because Syd wasn't just missing notes. He was missing presence. And deep down, they all understood the truth they were trying not to say. This wasn't something they could fix. The day Pink Floyd gave up on Syd Barrett didn't come with an argument. It came with silence. A car was loaded. A show was scheduled. And someone asked a simple question. Do we pick Syd up? No one answered right away. They already knew what the answer meant. Picking him up meant chaos, uncertainty, risk. Not picking him up meant something worse. It meant accepting that Syd could no longer function inside the band he created. And so the car drove on. No confrontation, no goodbye, no explanation, just absence. That was the day Syd Barrett stopped being part of Pink Floyd. Not because he was fired, not because he failed, but because the band realized that keeping him would destroy everyone involved, including Syd himself. It was a decision made out of fear, necessity, and survival. And it haunted them forever. Because abandoning someone quietly is often more painful than rejecting them loudly. From that moment on, Syd didn't just disappear from the lineup. He became a presence that followed the band everywhere, in guilt, in memory, and eventually, in music. Letting Syd go didn't remove him from Pink Floyd. It transformed him. After that day, Syd was no longer a person inside the band. He became an absence that shaped everything they created. His silence echoed louder than any guitar. The band moved forward, but something essential was missing. And instead of ignoring it, they began writing around it. Songs started circling themes of loss, distance, and unreachable connection. Lyrics sounded like messages sent to someone who would never reply. Years later, Roger Waters would admit something quietly devastating. He felt like he had already grieved Syd decades before Syd actually died. Because Syd didn't disappear suddenly, he faded. Little by little, he became inaccessible, not angry, not bitter, just unreachable. And that kind of loss is harder to process than death. Pink Floyd learned to turn that grief into sound. Albums like Wish You Were Here weren't just reflections on fame or absence. They were attempts to speak to someone who could no longer hear them. Syd wasn't gone, he was everywhere. In the spaces between notes, in the longing tone of the music, in the feeling that something beautiful had slipped through their fingers. They survived without him, but they never escaped him. And that truth would confront them in the most surreal way imaginable. On the 5th of June, 1975, Pink Floyd was in the studio working on a song written for Syd, Shine On You Crazy Diamond. They were polishing the final mix. A tribute. A farewell shaped like music. Then the door opened. A man walked in, overweight, bald, eyebrows shaved, a toothbrush in his mouth. No one recognized him. Not at first. This wasn't the Syd they remembered. Not the charismatic leader. Not the brilliant songwriter. It took a moment for reality to land. That man was Syd Barrett. The shock was unbearable. Here was the person they had written the song for, appearing on the exact day they were finishing it. The timing felt cruel, almost unreal. Conversation was awkward, fragmented. There was no confrontation, no emotional release. Just silence, confusion, and heartbreak. That moment confirmed something none of them wanted to admit. Syd wasn't coming back. Not to the band. Not to the world they shared. The song played on, and Syd drifted out again quietly, without drama, leaving behind a truth that would never change. The music could honor him, but it could never reach him. For decades, people searched for a simple explanation. They pointed to excess, to the era, to substances. But the truth was never that simple. Those close to Syd believed something deeper was already forming, a fragile mind drifting off course long before anyone understood what was happening. The pressures didn't create the collapse. They accelerated it. Syd became increasingly detached from reality. Communication broke down. The world lost coherence. And when experimentation entered that fragile state, it made everything worse. What followed wasn't chaos, it was withdrawal. Syd retreated from public life, from music, from the people who once knew him best. He returned to Cambridge, lived quietly, painted, avoided contact with his past. Even his family believed it was kinder not to remind him of who he had been. When Syd died in 2006, Roger Waters said something haunting. He felt like he'd already mourned him years earlier. Because Syd had been gone long before his body left, that's the cruelest ending of all. Pink Floyd didn't abandon Syd out of cruelty. They did it out of fear, confusion, and survival. But the cost was permanent, and the music they created afterward carries that weight. A reminder of the day they moved on, and the friend they never truly left behind. Pink Floyd didn't lose Syd Barrett in a single moment. They lost him slowly, quietly, without realizing when the goodbye had truly happened. The day they stopped picking him up wasn't an act of cruelty. It was an act of survival. But survival always leaves scars. Syd became the silence inside their music, the absence they could never explain away, the friend they never stopped missing even while moving forward. And maybe that's why his presence still feels so close. Because some people don't leave through the door. They fade from reach. If this story made you see Pink Floyd and Syd Barrett differently, share your thoughts in the comments. Was there another choice? Or was that day unavoidable? If you want more stories like this, the ones hidden between the notes, Subscribe to the channel, like the video, and stay with us. Because some of the most important moments in music history happened in silence.